Hello, everyone. It's good to see you today. Thank you so much for being here. I am pleased and honored to introduce our speaker, Angela Tucker. Angela Tucker is an unabashed truth teller and a gifted speaker and educator. She is a Black woman adopted from foster care to a white family. Her determination and insatiable curiosity is an inspiration to many, and it's on display through her search for her biological parents in the documentary Closure. As a film producer, author, and cultural commentator, Angela has appeared on CNN, Al Jazeera, Red Table Talk, and other media outlets to help center adoptee stories and bring clarity and truth narratives about race, class, and identity. Angela is a mentor and advisor to adoptees nationwide and serves as a sensitivity consultant on Broadway's Jagged Little Pill and NBC's show, This Is Us. Her vision is to amplify and center adoptee voices. Her book is scheduled for publication in the spring of 2023, so keep a lookout. Let's welcome and give a virtual round of applause for Angela.
Thank you, Demonte. Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody who has their cameras on. I literally am looking at those of you with your cameras on because it helps me feel like I'm not talking to my cat right here. Like you're out there. So I really appreciate it and appreciate your facial expressions letting me know that you're hearing me, you're with me, or like you're confused, you didn't get that. What are you talking about? Any of that. I'm reading your facial body language. And so I appreciate that. And if you put questions in the chat, I'm not going to address them as they come up, but I certainly will keep a record of the chat, look at that later, and will likely address it on my social media afterwards. And we might have time at the end of either today or next week to address some of the questions. So feel free to put them in there. I just might not see it with such a large group, but I will certainly look through it later. So let's jump in. We only have a couple hours today. Today is primarily lecture, a little bit of interactivity towards the end. Next week, we are going to break out into smaller groups to have more robust discussions, specifically role playing, really kind of tricky but inevitable transracial adoption related microaggressions. Those frustrating comments like, where'd you get them? How'd you get them? How much do they cost? Things like that really irk us, but are asked. We'll talk about that next week. And then the following week will be a panel. I'm going to bring other adoptees, transracial adoptees, to speak alongside me. You can ask them your questions, but that's really important to me because I never want to represent all transracial adoptee voices. I am just one. They are all valid. And so it's really exciting that we'll be able to hear from others in a couple weeks. So who am I? Let's start off with that. I am in the bottom right hand of this photo. This is a photo of my family. I was born in Tennessee, immediately became a ward of the state, had some inaccurate diagnoses, medical diagnoses that caused me to stay in foster care for a little while. And I would ask my parents as I grew up, why couldn't any Black families adopt me? And my parents would talk about this particular fact about my medical needs. But that discussion often led way to bigger discussions about disproportionality, about why more white people adopt through foster care than people of color, especially at that time in the mid 80s. They were talking to me about the treatment of Black and brown families by CPS and foster care that helped me understand why I was in their family. It's an important thing for me to talk about that because that's one of the key pieces of the health of my identity and health of my place in my family is not that my parents were perfect. They are not. My dad wears tube socks and Birkenstocks. He makes dad jokes that he thinks are funny and they're not, they are, they're your average folks, which is notable too, because all my life I grew up with the microaggression of your parents are incredible. They must be saints, and throughout this work together this week, next week, and the week after, we're going to think about those microaggressions from the adoptee's perspective. But my parents were average in a lot of ways. They are. They didn't know everything there was to know about white privilege, white supremacy, or how society would come to view Black bodies in particular. But what they had was an awareness that their multiracial family would not be immune to ignorant comments, projection of stereotypes, the unsolicited advice. They knew that race was a factor no matter what. And that allowed me to ask questions of them, like, why couldn't any Black family adopt me? And I was not met with, you're not grateful. Are you not grateful for what we've done? I was met with conversation that allowed me to better understand how I got here across the country from Tennessee to Washington State. Over a decade ago now, must be about a decade, a film came out about my search for my birth parents, and I hope that everybody was provided with a link to download and watch that. If not, please let us know. But this film, I want to just play the trailer so we can all get on the same page about some of my personal journey towards identity, discovering, learning about my roots. My birth family was a huge part of that. I grew up in a closed adoption. We just couldn't know many details at all. And so when I was legally allowed to start searching, legally allowed to get my original birth certificate at 21, I started on that journey. And the documentary was never intended to be a public, like, it was a surprise when Netflix called and Hulu and Amazon and iTunes. We were shocked because my intention originally was to have some home video footage of an experience that I knew I would be too overwhelmed to remember. I also wasn't sure if this would be the first and the last time that I would ever see my birth parents. And there were things that I knew I wanted that many people may not think of as important. Things like, I wanted to know, did my birth mom mow her lawn? Or was her lawn really long? Does she have, a brick house? Or, these are details that were just gold to me. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to remember them. So I'd asked my husband, who was not a filmmaker at the time, to just grab a camera and record some of this. At the same time, I was working at an adoption agency, writing home studies for families who wanted to adopt. And these families were saying things like, they were saying things like, maybe it's confusing for a child to know both families. Or, we're going to provide such great stability and opportunities that why would my child ever need to know the tragedy of their circumstances that they came from? They were saying things that I knew I could show from like a real-time at that moment basis, how important it was to keep the roots. And so I decided to kind of put some of this footage together so that I could share it with my clients and show them that I have wonderful parents, and that was not enough. It was not enough. I needed to know where I came from. I needed to be surrounded by Black and brown people, and I wasn't. And this is some of the outcome of that. And so that's ultimately why we put this film together, not knowing the greater impact that it would come to have. But let me show you the trailer, and then we will jump into the meat of today's work.
Okay, I'm going. I'm going.
and I never thought that she would probably find her birth father. And she called me up one night.
She told me that she thought she found him.
You do look like him.
We were just like, that's him. That's him. He just stared at me. I don't know exactly what he heard me say.
All my life, I've been told I was 3 boys and 3 girls in the family, that I was unable to have kids. It was just a miracle.
Sandy and his brother Jay knew where Deborah lived and said, "Want to go drive by?" And so we thought, okay. Angela right away said, "Deborah, I think you might be my birth mother."
And I could just hear Deborah say, you know, "I'm not the person you're looking for."
It was just really sad. I just felt so bad for her. Deborah may be the one person on this world that I will not be able to figure out.
My blood and your blood are the same.
I do feel like I deserve to know stuff. I feel like she has an obligation to tell me something.
It's hard to see the good surrounding me. The clouds are covering truth in the lies.
I owe you all this that I'll never be.
And the sound it makes is an honest song. Our hearts sing an honest song.
We all got connected whether we knew it or not. And for the rest of my life, I'll be connected.
So thank you for those of you who'd let me know that you couldn't hear it. Did it get better after I amped up my volume? Yeah, okay. And also in the chat, I know Taylor, Brittany, perhaps they've put the link and the password so you don't have to pay. You can download it. So that's in the chat. Let's
Okay.
see if I can do this. No, didn't think so. Go back out. So both of those initial slides were just to help you understand who I am, where I'm coming from. My work is very adoptee centric. So you'll notice that as we go through each week, that I will often reframe everything through the lens of the adoptee. We can, much of what we're talking about today can also apply to kids of color who are in foster care with white parents. Transracial adoption, of course, includes any mix. My lens really is focused on white parents with kids of color. However, a lot of this is applicable all across the board. So I want to start, okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about some history of transracial and transcultural adoption, just a few pieces of legislation that's important, current best practices, although I put in parentheses intentional practices because the words best practices, many of us are really not feeling anymore because it kind of implies that there's no room for growth or change, that this is how it's going to be forever. And what we really mean is the most intentional practices for today and what we know today. So I'm going to share some of that. And then the latter half of our work will be to ground us in the racial norms of American society. This is to help us see the world through our transracial adoptees' eyes, unless we work really hard to manipulate our surroundings so that there is better racial representation for them. So you'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. Let's start with just some terminology. The first is the words put up for adoption. This is something that we hear often, and it's quite inappropriate because its roots are actually from the orphan trains in the mid 1800s until the early 1900s, where about 200,000 abandoned, orphaned, homeless kids were relocated onto trains. And They were predominantly cities from the Northeast, and they were put on the train to go to kind of the rural Midwest to help with manual labor, essentially. And they, before this orphan train would arrive to whatever city, there would be these flyers that got sent out, like this one on the screen in Troy, and that said, you know, meet us down at the Opera House on this day at this time. This train is coming through. Where once the train got there, all of these kids would literally get up on platforms and dance or do push-ups or sing or show their like prowess to help with manual labor. You can absolutely see the parallel between slaveries, like slaves putting up on a slave box to be auctioned off, right? That language is so inappropriate, and it is not how we do adoption today. So we want to not use that language. That's the root of it. Another common terminology issue that I hear a lot is the words birth mother. In private adoption, which I know there's not a lot of private adoption folks here today, it's more foster care, but in private adoption, there can be a tendency to call a woman who's pregnant and trying to figure out what to do with her pregnancy a birth mother, when in reality, she's just an expectant mom. You know, that shows a lot of kind of coercion and assumptions when we call pregnant women birth parents. This is true in foster care too, that the kids' parents are their parents. When we use language like birth parents, it shows our motivation. Might be implicit or subconscious, but it certainly speaks volumes, what we think about that person. And then the last one is bringing her home. I hear this a lot in international adoption, but perhaps also foster care, where you make the assumption that your home is their home prior to them even being there, really negating their roots. They have a home. It may be unsafe, unstable. It might be on another continent, but they have a home. You're bringing them to another home. And so I think this happens a lot because we tend to want to gloss over the tragedy of it all. And this is a really kind of a cheeky way to avoid talking about the multiple placements that are happening, right? And that, so I hear this from a lot of international adoptees, how frustrating that is. It's a kind of a subtle nod to assimilate to our home, our culture, our way of life prior to even being there. I am admittedly going really quickly through some of these things. I could talk about them all day though, so but to stay on track, we will move forward to some legislation that's really key. In 1972, the National Association of Black Social Workers, which is the NABSW, put out a position statement that was really jarring. And a lot of people think about a couple lines in this statement. Let me find my notes here. There's a couple lines where the NABSW, they publicly announced their opposition to Black children being adopted into white families, saying it's cultural genocide. And people kind of went wild over that because that's strong language, right? If you put into context what they were saying and not just take those two words and think they felt that white families were completely destroying Black families through adoption, they were actually talking about during that time, 1970s, like, you know, the Jim Crow laws had barely died. Mass incarceration of Black bodies was on the rise. Black men were starting to become called super predators. Like, The National Association of Black Social Workers were really just saying, like, we're seeing in all of these other sectors things that are dismantling Black families, and this is no different. That's what they were trying to say. Another really key piece that's often overlooked in this statement is that they talked about how problems within wealthy white homes were often viewed as a private matter, whereas those same problems in poor neighborhoods were catapulted into the child welfare system. And I think some of us can probably see that even now today. You might think of some white folks you know who struggle with alcoholism, and how that can really quickly and easily be like, oh, I'm working on it. You know, I'm doing my best. I'm reaching out to a friend. Like, if you think about your life, you may have heard this kind of tone, certainly not people jumping to fear that their children are in danger. Whereas in poor Black zip codes, that very thing is what would happen, that there would be talk about alcoholism, and like they said in 1972, people's flags go up quicker and think, are the kids okay? Should we remove them? Okay, I'm going to stop with the NABSW there and move on to 1977. The CASA, or Guardian Ad Litem program, begins. I know I have a lot of CASAs here today, which is cool, but it's important to know about the history. And I think there's a lot of change happening, especially in LA's CASA program, which is fantastic. But the CASA program was incepted as a result of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which required a mandatory appointment of a guardian ad litem to represent the child's, quote, best interests. Unfortunately, at this time, the volunteer CASAs were overwhelmingly white, middle-aged, middle to upper class white women who were minimally trained. Kind, of course, which reminds me of this really great article about this, which is called However Kindly Intentioned. Hopefully we can put that in the chat, because it's an incredible article that talks about this, like very kind women starting this program, but their inherent bias was very clear. So they came from worlds that did not look like the world that they were representing for these kids. This world there, they had a say in the court of where the child should go next. So this created a lot of problems. I think there's a lot of change happening, but it's always important to know the roots. And this is the historical roots of CASA, was that implicit bias, inherent bias was baked in because of good intentions. The next year, in 1978, the Indian Child Welfare Act it's really exciting that this became law, because this basically monitored, it allowed the tribes to have a say in Native kids' placement. We know there is the history of, the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man, which led to us eradicating natives. Of course, we're hearing a lot about residential homes up in Canada and all that treatment, but because of that, there was a sense that Native kids could be adopted into white homes and just let's erase the Indian out of them. In 1978, this law said no. Any Native child that comes into the system, we must figure out which tribe they belong to first, and then check with that tribe to make sure there is nobody within that tribe that can care for this child before a stranger. This is really exciting, and I have a short video of a Native adoptee who talks about why this was so powerful, as he actually was adopted into a non-native home and then moved into a native home. I will put the captions on for this, but this is not one of my own videos, and so the captions are not accurate the whole time, which is very frustrating, but I'm still going to add them. And yeah, put in the chat like last time if you're having a hard time hearing.
My name is Lucas Angus, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, enrolled in Nez Perce. I'm also Cayuse, that's from my dad's side. I'm also Tlingit Haida descent on my mom's side. As far as I know, when I was born, I was immediately adopted.
It was pretty much decided for us. The doctor gave me a private attorney's name, and we never talked about the end result of Lucas being born and if I was going to keep him and raise him. And we just called the attorney. He came in and sat down and I signed the papers, and that was it. I was sick. I became anorexic. I didn't eat for almost 2 months. And I got a call from the attorney, and he said that we made a mistake and you need to go to court and get.
Okay, 1 second. I understand that it's hard to hear. I wonder if, can you tell me if this is better?
Give him up again, and I said no. That was the.
Is that better? Okay, so I had,
Much better.
okay, I had a microphone plugged in, and I think it was trying to pick up the sound from the mic. I'm going to start us over so you can hear it.
My name is Lucas Angus, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, enrolled in Nez Perce. I'm also Cayuse, that's from my dad's side. I'm also Tlingit Haida descent on my mom's side. As far as I know, when I was born, I was immediately adopted.
It was pretty much decided for us. The doctor gave me a private attorney's name, and we never talked about the end result of Lucas being born and if I was going to keep him and raise him. And we just called the attorney. He came in and sat down and I signed the papers, and that was it. I was sick. I became anorexic. I didn't eat for almost 2 months. And I got a call from the attorney, and he said that we made a mistake and you need to go to court and give him up again. And I said no. That was the beginning of the adoption battle.
The woman who adopted me, in our case, she wasn't knowledgeable of the law and ended up with a child that she adopted illegally without her knowledge of that. The legal proceedings to get me back took, I think, almost 2 years.
I had no idea what I was up against, but I was willing to do what it took. The very first visit, I sat on the floor and he walked around me, and then he just all of a sudden came over and looked at me in the face and then sat down on my lap, and he put his ear up to my heart. I remembered my heartbeat. If ICWA would have been complied with, so much time would have not been wasted. Counseling, broken hearts. The adoptive parents and I, we were fighting for something very dear and precious. She did what she had to do. I did what I had to do.
The problem with me was, there's too many people that wanted to have me and love me.
The end result of ICWA it's amazing. It's amazing to see it in place right here.
Culture grounds you and gives you something greater than just me. It takes away the selfishness, but it also, in a way, it is kind of all about you and making you stronger, and it makes everyone involved with that culture, more connected to each other and their surroundings, and a better person to offer themselves to the world. My Nez Perce name is Huitzca Ilp, which means red spike elk. My dad and that side of the family was really strong in the Nez Perce traditions, and I have good memories of the elders in that family making my moccasins and my regalia, my ribbon shirt, and put me on the dance floor. Each piece that I wear is for a special reason. These were made by my wife, and this is my great grandmother's bandana. This is a feather from my uncle. This is my medicine bag. It has various things that bring me strength. It has love in it, and it has the strength of my family. That sort of identity to your culture is what empowers you. I had to give my kids that sense of identity as well. When my first daughter was born, I wasn't really strong in the community, so I started introducing my little family to the Portland Native community a little bit at a time, the powwows and the Native Center. And now my other two kids, they've sort of been born into that. A few years back, the elders decided that as the canoe journeys are happening in Washington and Alaska, it was time to start a canoe family here. The canoe family is our extended family within the community. That's our way of prayer. That's our sacrifice. And it's, it brings us strength too. The elders had that vision, and somehow I became an important person in that vision of theirs. The role I've taken as a skipper is one that puts a lot of responsibility on me to steer the canoe, and so everyone who's paddling has trust in me. I've thought my whole life about, what if I didn't, end up back with my family? Things would have been totally different. I would have been a different person. This culture that I carry would be gone. With ICWA in place, we have the protection of our children and our families. It brings strength to our communities, and it brings strength to the coming generation of natives to take care of their kids and to raise happy people.
So I love this video because, well, for several reasons. It, of course, helps us understand and think clearly about the losses that Lucas would have experienced if he wasn't raised in his native culture. But the other piece that I think is often forgotten is that it's impacting his offspring, the next generation, that his children are also able to be raised understanding their roots. So key. It's something I talk to a lot of the kids that I mentor about, unbelievably. Specifically some of the young adults, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds who have been raised in kind of racial homogeneity. Non-native mentees of mine, Black and brown kids, are starting to ask me about how they could possibly have children and raise them to understand Black and brown culture. It's really powerful conversations that we're having that I certainly understand and want to make sure that's part of the discussions when social workers are doing home studies, is to think about your kids' kids and the detriment that racial homogeneity might have right now for 40 years down the road. Let me go back a slide. Also, I saw in the chat a question about the birth parent comment. And what should we call them instead? And so prior to a woman giving birth, you refer to them as you would any other woman who is pregnant. It is only because of our assumptions and our biases that we decide that we are going to call them a birth parent, usually because they're poor, they're homeless, they have children in the system already. These are things that cause us to put our judgment on them. You have friends who are pregnant who you may not ever think to call them a birth parent. So think about your friends when you think about a woman who maybe is experiencing a tough time and is pregnant. After they place and maybe make an adoption plan and sign paperwork that that they are choosing to place their child for adoption, or the state mandates that, whatever route it is, once an adoption is made, sure, then they might be a birth parent. However, I'm hearing from a lot of birth parents that the language they prefer is first parent or their name. I loved growing up calling my birth mother Deborah. That was her name. It humanized her in a way that I think birth parent doesn't. And humanizing her is really important to me. Otherwise, she was this mythical, fictional character out somewhere, and it really made it harder for me to understand where I came from. When I called her Deborah, I then, like, even as a 5-year-old and as a 10-year-old, I was like, oh, she's a human being. She has, it really humanized her. So that is a little clarity around that. The Multi-Ethnic Placement Act is the final piece of legislation that is really important for us to understand in the context of transracial and transcultural adoption and foster care. And this is an act passed in 1994, hoping to remedy the disproportionate representation of Black and Brown children in child welfare system. Essentially, though, it made it such that any governmental agency could not require a course like this prior to an adoption of a child of color. So agencies couldn't require transracial competency courses. And it's really problematic. This has been hotly contested by a lot of folks, myself included. But the hope was that they wanted to decrease the length of time that children stayed in care, and thought if there are families who are approved and we know that they have a safe home and that they are prepared in all the other ways, then let's put the child in that home right away. People like myself think cultural humility is as important as a safe home, as having a roof over your head and meals, transportation, all of that stuff that we think is so key, of course. I put cultural humility at that same level, but MIPA doesn't allow it. In 1996, there was an amendment to try to strengthen MIPA, but it primarily focused on language in the law, not around possibly making this actually mandatory. So in private agencies, this is often a like an extra class you could take. In public agencies as well, offering this, but take it if you want, kind of thing. Very harmful. So that's Multi-Ethnic Placement Act. Definitely encourage folks to research that. So one of the current best / intentional practices I think a lot of you are familiar with, because in LA County, you've started to do this blind race removal process from Jessica Price, which is really exciting. Basically, she has a great TED Talk that I would recommend, and our time is so short that I'm going to just suggest that you watch that. And then I want to play a short video of one of my attempts at improving the quality of adoptees' lives. And this is through openness. This model isn't specific to transracial and transcultural caregiving, but I'm going to tell you afterwards where race fits in. So this is a short little primer on what I've called the inclusive family support model. And this is a model that I've designed to let every single adoptive family know that you can have an open adoption, because openness is not synonymous with contact, direct contact. So every single adoption should be open, and this is how. Present. Just like a map gets you from where you are to where you want to be, this grid can help you plan your adoptive parenting journey. Every adoptive family fits somewhere within the inclusive family support grid, even yours. Let us introduce you to it. In a closed adoption, there is no contact with birth family, and there can be a sense of relief that the child now has a forever family and a fresh start. A mediated adoption is where there is contact with birth family, but the spirit is more of obligation than of a relationship. Why? Well, the adopted parents may have some underlying emotions like fear or insecurity, which is understandable. In the spirit of openness, contact with birth family may not be possible or safe. However, the adoptive family still engages in conversations about adoption regularly and with ease.
Daddy, I'm really missing my birth dad.
Oh, bud, I'm so sorry. I know this is really hard on you. Hey, do you remember what his favorite food was when you were together?
I remember he liked chocolate chip cookies, just like I do. Daddy, what do you remember about him?
I remember when you would see him, he was always singing. You both are so musical. You are so good at singing. I wish he could have heard you sing.
An inclusive adoption is where families have both contact and a heartfelt relationship. The child has access to all the important people in their life.
When did she first begin playing soccer?
We gave her a soccer ball for her second birthday, and it was immediately clear she was a natural.
So look within and identify your fears, your dreams, and maybe even your insecurities. These are all very normal feelings to have. Where is your family now on the grid? Where does your child need you to be? We know the lifelong journey of adoption is complex and unique. We at Amara are here to help you on your path. So those upper quadrants, the spirit of openness and inclusive adoption, those are the two quadrants that I hope every adoptive family is within. That the spirit of openness is kind of what I grew up with, where I could talk to my parents about my birth family. We didn't know about them, but I had an environment where I would say, you know, I wonder where my athleticism came from. And my parents would engage with me and say, we wonder too. I wonder if your birth dad was a basketball player. I wonder if, you know, I would see Magic Johnson on the TV and be like, he has a huge smile like I do. He plays basketball. He must be my birth dad. And my parents would say, we can understand why you would think that, but no, he's probably not your birth dad. But like that, you know, that sort of engagement is a spirit of openness. It's beautiful. This is also possible within foster care. I was adopted through foster care, but perhaps for kids who were removed from abusive situations, that we also still want to keep a spirit of openness, that we're still talking about their birth parents in positive ways, because no birth parent is all bad. And it really breaks my heart when I mentor adoptees who say, you know, my birth mom is in jail and that's the only thing they know about her. Because she is so much more than her criminal act. And it also just, the bigger picture, it stunts our understanding of humans, and it allows us to keep having such huge populations of people in prison, for example, because if we're just reducing them to their criminal act, then it's really a shame. And it also, for us adoptees, the few things we do know about our birth parents, it's very likely that we think of ourselves in the same way. So if they're bad, and that's all I'm hearing in the house, then I must be bad. And then the other quadrant, inclusive adoption, that is where we can meet at the park. We can have birth parents over at our house for dinner. That there's both contact and that spirit of openness and truthfulness. I am working with Amara, an agency in Seattle, to develop this model, and within a few months we'll have a assessment online for anyone to take, a series of questions that we've developed, and took some from an empirical article that was peer reviewed already, but folks will be able to answer questions on this assessment, and then it'll spit out where we perceive you on this grid. And then from there, be able to work with a social worker to move to a place of more openness. The overlay of race and culture comes from those fears and insecurities that I alluded to in this video. Things like, I often hear, you know, we can't meet at a park because birth dad may show up high. We can't have birth dad, birth mom to our house because, you know, they're notoriously late. Or I think most often than not, I hear comments about drugs. And sometimes these comments are stemming from like a decade before, when the child was removed from care because of drugs, and assuming that that's the situation still. That those are issues of implicit biases that need to get worked out, because there are pieces of perceived safety risks, and then there's actual safety risks. And it's really hard, I think, for parents to tease those out on their own. And it can be helpful to have another set of eyes to really understand, is this actually a safety risk, or is it my fears because I didn't grow up in this sort of fashion and manner? Okay, so the final thing before we move to part 2 of today is a video that I want to play of a Black adoptive dad and an Asian adoptee who is the adoptive mother to this boy from foster care. This video is about 15 minutes long, and it is, I'm showing it as a definition to that inclusive quadrant that we just saw. Okay. Oh, forgot to present first.
Adoption day wasn't really the happiest day.
You were emotional.
I was super emotional.
I'd always been a believer that adoption is the best thing ever.
kind of realized along the way, as I got older, and to get a positive.
See if everyone can mute themselves so we can hear the video. Thank you. Team, if you can find who's unmuted, that'd be helpful.
I kind of realized along the way, as I got older, that yes, adoption can be a positive thing, but it's so deeply filled with trauma that I never really evaluated that side of things.
Hey, I'm glad that Nico's out of the system. So I was happy that Nico was becoming my son legally, but I always felt that way. I was connected to him that way already. But with that, this loss happened of a mother not having any legal rights to her child.
I never really gave up my rights. They were taken from him being in the system for so long. I knew it was coming one day, but I just didn't know when.
Why, Dad? Why do I have to do this?
Just get in the car, bro.
When I met Nico, I didn't know he was in foster care. One day I was just in the daycare, hanging out with the kids. And Nico and I just kind of had like a really good bond. Like I felt really attached to him, and I'm not sure why I did. I just did, and I was just like, man, this child is like really like something about him is just with me. I don't know why. Like it's nothing like this has ever happened to me.
Right,
So I'm
you
like,
played with hundreds of kids.
Right.
You cared for
lots. Yeah, lots.
Bruce is really the one that was bringing up foster care. He's bringing up this idea of expanding our family in this way. And I was just like, no, I don't. I remember just at that point, I was just very, not all adoption is good adoption. I think I was coming to terms with the complexity. But ultimately, I didn't know if I would be good at the reality of how difficult adoption is. And even foster care, the real difficulty of foster care.
Happy birthday! Let's go! Let's go! Yeah! Happy birthday! Hey! Happy birthday, Nico!
I've always wanted to foster. The goals were unification, so you know it would be. We didn't have any kids at the time. It was like, oh, you know, we have space. We have, yeah, we could care for kids. Like we care for kids every day. And then they were like, well, if the goal is change to adoption, would you guys be open to it? And we were like, yeah, sure, we'd be open to it. So it kind of happened like that. So it was just like, whoa, like this kid is now at my house, and yeah, so.
Bruce and I had to have a lot of conversations because I am an adoptee and he is not. And so in the beginning, it was me trying to educate him on what that trauma looks like of losing your first family. But I think that there was still this concept of permanency where he was still probably, like a lot of foster parents, still believing that he would grow so attached. I was trying to give him insight and saying, if you think that this will lead to permanency with Nico being in our family, we have to get out in front of everything and make decisions early on that allow for the possibility of openness.
All right, Dr. Seuss, green eggs and ham. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them. Sam, I am.
When I got pregnant, I was very grief stricken in probably the first trimester of my pregnancy because it was just so overwhelming. Really just made me have to think about my Oma, my Korean mother. Just everything that she must have went through as I was growing inside of her, and then knowing ultimately that she would make the choice to give me up. When I became pregnant, all I could see was pain and suffering from her.
On her part.
On her part.
Like whether she chose to relinquish you or something else happened where she had to.
Right.
What you were experiencing was like,
it was just deep, deep sadness at first, and it was weird because it was simultaneously a lot of joy. I was so overwhelmed and happy about being pregnant, but it was really deeply saddening.
now that Zephaniah's here, he's like the first person that you've ever seen that looks like you.
Yeah.
And he really looks like you.
Yeah. When he came out, like I knew, I was like, wow, my genes are very strong, because I looked down at his eyes and I looked down, just at his little face, and I just knew this is part of me.
I believe. Well, Nico is my second child.
What you been doing?
I was going through some rough times when he came into the world, but I had him up until 2 weeks before his first birthday. And then that's when everything happened where he got took from me. I was using or whatever, but that wasn't the issue part of it. It was the fact of me being homeless. I've been homeless since 2011, bouncing around from different houses and stuff.
Well, we met Brian really briefly at an interactional. So that's where psychologists sit and evaluate your interactions with the child that is potentially going to be adopted. It's a part of the termination of the birthrights process, actually. They want to see how the child is bonded. They wanted to evaluate Bruce and myself with Nico. And then later that day, they wanted to evaluate Brianne and Nico. So our first meeting
Sounds like
was really difficult. How can you in that moment form any type of relationship when you're already like us versus her? That's where I felt as though that's where the system has to change, because that shouldn't have been our initial meet. After that, the next interactions we had were in court. Also not a great place to build a relationship, because we're talking about issues that are related to, all
termination of rights.
Yes, yes, exactly. Of severing that tie. And then the judge wants to know who we are. And that, and it just again becomes this, we're here, she's over there. That might have been a little bit of a rough start, but Nico needs so much more than my discomfort.
When I just recently went to jail this last time, within that time, they let me know, we did the adoption.
You got adopted when you were in jail.
Yeah. And they was like, we did the adoption, but it happened so fast, we had to hurry up and do it or whatever. And I was like, that's cool. I knew it was coming one day, but I just didn't know when.
The Act 101 in the state of Pennsylvania is basically allowing for mediation services for pre-adopted families, that are really moving towards adoption, and then the biological family.
To meet together.
To meet together in a very professional, neutral space. Purpose is to get together and have a conversation to potentially build relationships that will help the child in the future. And so I like just prepared myself because I just didn't know if she was coming in wanting to fight or like what. And I wouldn't blame her if she wanted to fight because that's her son. And I remember the first point of connection that I made with her in that conversation was that I value you as Nico's mother. And I know that that role will never, ever be taken away from you in the sense of like what you are in his heart. There was a moment of relief in her because I think that she had come ready to say, I am his mother.
Fight to be
I am
seen.
his mom.
Right.
And I told her, I was like, I'm adopted, Brianne. I know more than you would think
Yes, I know what it's like to have two moms.
about having two moms. But when we opened it up based on that premise, we gave back some of the power that had been stripped of her. She became so much more open to hear what we had to say.
That was a very hard situation for me right there. Until me and Miss Emily, Mr. Eric too, we all went out to eat and we talked. And they said we would never keep him from. We want you to be a part of our family just like he is.
Yesterday when Brianne got here and Nico ran up to her.
Right.
How does that make you feel?
Just to see that she's like, you know, she can be with her son, you know, like that's really, it makes me so happy.
I know that Nico sees such a strong role model in his dad, but he knows that he can feel emotions too. It's been really a pleasure to watch Nico's need for his dad and my husband's need for his sons in that way. Kids, you're shaping them, you're bringing them up, you're helping them grow, whatever, but really they're changing you more than you're changing them.
It's been a rough road, it really has, but I'm grateful for Miss Emily and Mr. Eric. They don't try to keep Nico from me. They try to make sure I'm involved in everything that he does.
No matter what's happened in the past, she's Nico's mom. I'm raising him to honor his mother, and in that I have to honor her too.
We're mothers to the same child. We just have this sisterhood almost. And that has been built over time. And we love each other.
People think that they own kids, but I don't believe that. We're here to steward children. More love is not hurting anyone. People are like, oh, well, they're a safety risk. I'm like, you can't meet at a Starbucks in a public area. There's always a way. But it's only if you really want there to be a way. And you're humble enough to hear your child call someone else mom or dad.
Bruce is just, you know, his arms are like just so endlessly big. like literally and figuratively. He is really the guiding factor when it comes to the embracing and the inclusivity of everything.
At the end of the day, he's loved. There's more love.
Thank you for watching that with me. This video and all of the other videos I've created are on my website and they're free. So for the professionals in the room, please use this as educational tool as you wish. That's really why it's here. My husband and I work really hard not to exploit any adoptees in the work of our videos, you know, that we are really careful about what we include and what we exclude. But this video is fully, available for all to use. And I think it's powerful in lots of ways. And if you use this, please don't hesitate to engage in conversations that I couldn't help but when I was with them, notice the power imbalance still, as wonderful as Eric, who goes by Bruce, and Emily are in trying to incorporate Brienne into their lives. She still, and I think will always refer to them as Mr. Eric, Miss Emily. And, it's a nod to perhaps upbringing in the South, well, kind of Northeast, but more than anything, I think it's this position that many birth parents feel to the adoptive parent, that we are subservient and less than. And so that's another.
What came?
Trying to make sure you're muted. I'll just wait. Okay, there we go. So just a quick note to remember your power and positionality, even when as Bruce is a Black man and Emily is Korean and Brienne is Black, there is still a power imbalance. So that is something to bring up as you're having discussions about how this family has centered Nico in the middle of both families. So let's make a 90-degree turn. We are going to move into the first part was really a grounding in history, historical practices around a transracial adoption, some legislation that's important to know, real high level, real primer sort of thing. But let's move to talk about race, racism, implicit biases, how America looks. And again, friendly reminder to mute yourself. Okay, let me present here. As we talk about race, racism, it's easy to get hot and heavy and heated. And so I would remind you about predatory listening versus active listening. I talk about racism all the time, so it's not that big, but I actually use these tools when I'm just having a conversation with my husband about something not related to race, just like other things. I think about predatory listening versus active listening in the sense that when you are kind of predatory listener, that means that you can interrupt a speaker. You have this burning desire to begin your rebuttal seconds after they finish speaking. And so that you're an active listener if you aren't able to respond seconds after they finish, because our brains actually can't digest information and then formulate information that quickly. We need a moment. So active listening, you're doing it when it takes you a moment to respond. Predatory listening, you're on them hot in a second. No, we don't want that today. Let's be active listeners. I'm going to start with a video. Short video. I want everyone to play around. This is a game. And the winner can get some capitalist thing like I'll buy you a Tesla. I'll buy you a car if you win.
Basketball.
Okay, here are the instructions. Count how many times the player's wearing white pass the basketball.
How many passes did you count?
Okay, so if you want to win a Tesla, you can put in the chat your answer. Since there's 400 people, I probably can't afford it. And I think some of you may have already seen this video, so I'm just going to get to the main piece.
The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
So this is just a funny video that has been used ad nauseum, but I just think it's fantastic because it articulates a little bit of what we're talking about today. That this is called the selective attention test, and there's lots of different formations of it. But as this other formations of this video have been done, usually about 30% of folks don't see the thing like the gorilla in this video. So it's very common to miss. And I think it's a great illustration of what we're going to talk about today, because in this video, you were given instructions to count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. And in doing that, you focus so hard that many of you didn't notice something that is just blaringly obvious. So then once it rewinds and we see it again, we're like, oh my goodness, yes, it was there the whole time. Like, what in the world? That reminds me a lot of what we're going to talk about right now, which I am going to go through a series of norms in American society around race that once I bring them up, they may be like that gorilla. Like, what? I didn't even know that's happening right in front of my eyes all these years. And to think back to this video and think it's because you were trained not to see it. Not because you're a bad person. I want to present. It's not working. There we go. Make sure that we're all familiar with a key term, colorism, because this is like, it'll bleed throughout the whole lesson today. But colorism is on full display here as we look at Beyonce. On the left is a red carpet photo, just someone snapped a photo of her, and on the right is a magazine ad for hair dye. And you see that on the right, L'Oreal, the ad, has brightened up her skin. And on the left, that's just like a photo without much touching up or whatever. And the reason L'Oreal does this is because they know that brighter skin, the lighter your skin is, the brighter your skin is, the prettier you are, the smarter you are, the richer you are. All of these assumptions come with having lighter skin. It reminds me when I met my birth sister, who is a half sister, one of the first things she said to me was, "You're so lucky to be a high yellow." And at the time I didn't know what she meant, which is frustrating in a transracial adoption sort of way, feeling like I don't understand my own culture for a moment. But a high yellow is talking about having brighter skin. So my birth sister was saying to me, when the first thing she said when we met about 10 years ago is that you're so lucky that you automatically get some privileges, like you are seen as prettier, happier, more successful, richer, stronger, all of these things. It stems from the brown paper bag test, which was blatant discrimination where in the United States, if you were lighter than a brown paper bag, then you got access to places like the movie theater, the grocery store, parties. If you were darker, you couldn't go. So this is, you start to see how this messaging is embedded into our society of who's good, who's not. I hear this a lot because my husband is white. We do not have biological children, but I hear a lot of folks tell us like, oh, your children would be so beautiful if you had some. You know, and that's a direct comment on colorism, that mixed children are prettier. That sort of language is what is being said there. Before we talk about racial norms, I want to make sure we know what a norm is. So if we're talking about just social norms in America, what might that be? And maybe put them in the chat. Like, what is an example of a social norm? These are like the unspoken rules of society. Everybody knows it, but it's not written down anywhere. Yeah, Lindsay, making eye contact. Jenny, take your shoes off at the door. Handshake when you meet somebody. Yes. In America, there's like a distance that you kind of stay. And with COVID, maybe it's bigger. Facing forward in an elevator, holding the door open for somebody. Please and thank you. This is fantastic. Yes, these are all social norms. These are all things that all of us kind of know, practice, abide by, even though maybe we weren't explicitly told. So take this same concept and now we're going to apply it to race. Let's start with this. This is the science mannequin body thingy. I'm always curious if anybody has been to a school where this mannequin was not white. And it's, again, all of these examples that I'm about to show are for the purpose of us looking at the world through the transracial adoptees' perspective. That these are the norms. And so when you go into your science class and you see this really deep implicit embedding that's happening is telling you that you're not normal. This is normal and you are not it. I have seen some of like the new CPR little babies are brown skinned, which is nice. We're getting somewhere. TV shows is a really obvious one that if you just turn on the TV without a lot of work, that it's very likely you're going to see the main characters as people of color or non-people, main characters as white people. Ava DuVernay has a new test that she is putting out for Hollywood folks that I love. And it's not just how many people of color are you casting in your shows, but are the people of your color in your shows fully realized characters? Like they're not there because of their race and that's what their character is based around, talking about racism and stuff. Are they there with a character that has nothing to do with race? And that's really awesome. So yay for Ava DuVernay. Hair is really common to think about when we think about norms. We think about the Crown Act, but when you Google unprofessional hairstyles, when I Googled it, this is what came up. We see kinky, coily, curly hair, professional hairstyles with sleek, shiny. This is when I think about my childhood at probably around middle school was when I became adamant that I have wigs and weaves. For me, it was to look like my mom and my friends and to have my hair blow in the wind like them. I certainly still wear wigs and weaves, which is fun, and natural hair and all the things, but for a different purpose now. It's not to assimilate and to try to assume that Eurocentric look. It's for fashion or wherever I decide that day. This is an example of two dollhouses, the same dollhouse. One is a white girl playing with white dolls in this dollhouse. The other is a black girl playing with black dolls. Nothing is different except the skin tone, and yet the black dollhouse is half the price. Certainly we could think about algorithms and what's going on there, but the main point for me is, again, for representation, for our kids seeing this, the messaging seeps into our soul and psyche and who we think of ourselves to be, and who matters. This is like a book teaching kids how to write. And you can see that the words happy and proud are paired with light white kids, and sad and angry are paired with brown kids. Likely this is implicit bias at work, but it went through so many layers. The publishing house, the creators, lots of people had a say and decided this is what we were going to publish. Again, think about the gorilla in the video. They are not bad people, but this is simply not what they were trained to see. For people like myself, being Black, growing up in a white home, this is all I would have saw. I look to find myself in a book, and I see that in this Black girl, and I would then subconsciously pair that term with myself. The Clarke-Doll test is a must-see for all, and so I'm going to play a short clip of this just to help us understand that young children are not immune to racial stereotyping, nor should they.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll?
That one.
Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and you have 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's Black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me.
Yeah, which one looks like you?
And that one.
So this video has been replicated many times since 1939 when it was initially created, and the results have been the same. It is heartbreaking, of course. The bigger picture is that, well, we need to understand that we categorize things as a survival mechanism, first off. So, we used to need to know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a kitten. Like we needed to know the difference to stay alive. Since race became a construct, that began getting embedded into how we view the world and who is safe and who is not. It is heartbreaking and it's a reality. So part of my work with you, and we'll do a lot of this next week, is to get beyond the fury and the frustration and the anger at it, and instead work towards change. So how can we slowly, we can only slowly work towards change of some of these really deep-rooted beliefs if we first know them, see them, acknowledge them. We understand things like this. This was in Everybody's Magazine 4 years ago. If you picked up a magazine 4 years ago, you saw this ad, but you may not have really seen it. And so if you didn't see it, then we can't make change. Seeing things like how Dove, again, another example of a company that who knows how much money they spent to figure out how they wanted to sell their product. But lots of people had eyes on this campaign, which basically said, you're going to start out ugly, brown, dark, use our product, and you'll end up white, light. And in this next one, you'll end up a little thinner, which is just awful. Hey, you should know my laughter is not, I'm not really laughing. It's just irksome. All this to say is we have to see it. And then the next piece, which I assume is where a lot of us are, is learn how to channel that anger, because our kids need to see us respond in a way that amplifies them. And that is what we'll work on tomorrow with the role play, to ultimately change perceptions. For a positive note here, before we get into a little bit of interactivity, I want to hear your voice to end our time together. But there's been a little bit of progress. The Band-Aid company has decided that there's 3 shades of brown. So now there's 3 shades. But as exciting as that is, I would point you to True Color or Browndages, also Band-Aids that are for brown skin. Browndages is Black owned. True Color is owned by a transracial adoptive family. Both of those are great options. We know that kids want to wear Elsa Band-Aids and, glitter and stuff. Besides the point. Every doctor's office, your doctor's office, should have these next to peach skin tone or whatever, next to the glitter and stuff, right? That your house should have these and the fun kid Band-Aids too. That's how we start to change the narrative that peach is synonymous with skin tone and flesh. Like, no, it's not true, but we need to do more than just say it. So I would like to hear your voice a little bit as we round out our time together. Lupita Nyong'o spoke at a Black Excellence Award show in Hollywood, and she talks about colorism. And so I'd like to watch it together and then have a little conversation about what she said. Before I start it, can I just get confirmation that everyone can hear it and see it? It's working. Yes, great.
I received a letter from a girl, and I'd like to share just a small part.
Sorry. One more key. This is not my video. And so the captions, again, aren't correct, but there's a name that she says about halfway through. She says the name of a person, and that person's name is Alec Weck. And it can be hard to understand what she's saying at that time. So I just want to give you that.
A girl, and I'd like to share just a small part of it with you. Dear Lupita, it reads, you're really lucky to be this Black, but yet this successful in Hollywood overnight. I was just about to buy Dentures Whitenicious cream to lighten my skin when you appeared on the world map and saved me. My heart bled a little when I read those words. I could never have guessed that my first job out of school would be so powerful in and of itself, and that it would propel me to be such an image of hope in the same way that the women of The Color Purple were to me. I remember a time when I too felt unbeautiful. I put on the TV and only saw pale skin. I got teased and taunted about my night-shaded skin. And my one prayer to God, the miracle worker, was that I would wake up lighter skinned. The morning would come and I would be so excited about seeing my new skin that I would refuse to look down at myself until I was in front of a mirror because I wanted to see my fair face first. And every day I experienced the same disappointment of being just as dark as I had been the day before. I tried to negotiate with God. I told him I would stop stealing sugar cubes at night if he gave me what I wanted. I would listen to my mother's every word, sitting right there, and never lose my school sweater again if he just made me a little lighter. But I guess God was unimpressed with my bargaining chips because he never listened. And when I was a teenager, my self-hate grew worse. As you can imagine, happens with adolescents. My mother reminded me often that she thought I was beautiful, but that was no consolation. She's my mother. Of course, she's supposed to think I'm beautiful. And then Alec Weck came on the international scene. A celebrated model. She was dark as night. She was on all the runways and in every magazine, and everyone was talking about how beautiful she was. Even Oprah called her beautiful. And that made it a fact. I couldn't believe that people were embracing a woman who looked so much like me as beautiful. My complexion had always been an obstacle to overcome, and all of a sudden, Oprah was telling me it wasn't. It was perplexing, and I wanted to reject it because I had begun to enjoy the seduction of inadequacy. But a flower couldn't help but bloom inside me. When I saw Alec, I inadvertently saw a reflection of myself that I could not deny. Now, I had a spring in my step because I felt more seen, more appreciated by the faraway gatekeepers of beauty. But around me, the preference for light skin prevailed. To the beholders that I thought mattered, I was still unbeautiful. And my mother again would say to me, "You can't eat beauty. It doesn't feed you." And these words played and bothered me. I didn't really understand them until finally I realized that beauty was not a thing that I could acquire or consume. It was something that I just had to be. And what my mother meant when she said, "You can't eat beauty," was that you can't rely on how you look to sustain you. What actually sustains us, what is fundamentally beautiful, is compassion for yourself and for those around you. That kind of beauty, that kind of beauty inflames the heart and enchants the soul. It is what got Patsy in so much trouble with her master, but it is also what has kept her story alive to this day. We remember the beauty of her spirit, even after the beauty of her body has faded away. And so, I hope that my presence on your screens and in magazines may lead you, young girl, on a similar journey, that you will feel the validation of your external beauty, but also get to the deeper business of being beautiful inside. That there is no shade in that beauty. Thank you.
Love it. So I want to take a moment and ask for your reflections on a couple things, but one reason I love playing this video is because she says something in there that I hear from a lot of the transracial adoptees that I mentor, where they say things. Lupita said, "My mother tells me I'm beautiful, but she's my mother. Of course she's supposed to say that." And I love it because I hear a lot of transracial adoptive parents telling me, pleading, letting me know, I tell my daughter all the time how beautiful she is. And I like to let them know that's not enough. Please continue to do that. But when the messages outside are things like that Dove ad, the television shows, the mannequin at the science room, all of those examples, it's just not enough for us to feel beautiful, like we belong. I want to know, and you can raise your hand digitally and then I'll call on you, but what you think Lupita meant when she said, "I'd begun to enjoy the seduction of inadequacy." Start with
I think Tanya was the first person to raise her hand.
Yeah, see that. Can you
see? Oh, hi, you guys. I'm Tanya.
Hi.
She became very complacent with it, and she began to accept what society was telling her.
And what about that word enjoy? She said she began to enjoy that, as you say, being complacent with what society was telling her. What does that mean?
She made herself to believe it. So she started to respond or react to what she believed.
Thank you. Chelsea Krob, don't know how to pronounce your last name.
Okay. Yeah, what I hear is that she's internalized this external validation of what beauty is, and that yeah, it just became like a comfort zone to like just be self-loathing essentially.
Great. Yeah, thank you. We'll do the 5 folks who have their hands up and then we'll stop. Johnson family.
Hello, can you see me?
Yes, hi.
Oh, hi. I'm April from Ohio. This has been an incredible session. I mean, I have cried, I've laughed, I've done all kinds of things. So you're amazing. And I'm really glad. My husband and I are adoptive parents, and our little girl is a Black girl. She's Black. We adopted, and we still foster. We have a little one right now who we're fostering. But to answer your question, I agree with what the other 2 women mentioned wholeheartedly. But I also feel like it was almost like a cry, Lupita's cry to society that we have to do better. We have to make change in order for other brown girls behind her, Black and brown girls, to not be put in a situation where they have to feel that way, but yet they are given a fair chance at feeling like enough. Does that make sense?
It makes sense how so many, well, I'm just excited to see a Black woman fostering. Yay, congrats,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.
But I think what you're talking about is a little bit of that tightrope that so many marginalized folks walk. Where you're simultaneously saying one thing and doing another. Because I think I'm curious at what point you heard her making that call for the next generation to change.
When I think it was 2 parts. So the part where she mentioned when she actually said for any other little girls watching or listening, or however she worded it, that I think that part, and then the part where she said she had begun to accept feeling inadequate, that was like a turn, almost to me, like to your point about the Band-Aids. Why aren't those Band-Aids in every doctor's office? Why aren't they available at drugstores and things like that? Just like the Frozen, just like the Disney, just like anything else, And so I think that I sort of tied those 2 together a little bit.
Great, thank you. Mel.
Sure, thank you.
Mel Futrell. And then we'll go
that was really better than most. That was awesome. My name in terms of pronunciation. I get all kinds. I am the quickest backstory I can give. My dad left when I was 4, and the family that raised me is a Black family. So I was a little bit in the reverse, and but not really, because we all know that it's not the same. And I am now adopting twins with, they have one white parent, one Black parent. So it is a transracial adoption, but then again, it isn't, because my family matches them, ironically. But at the same time, there's a whole lot going on. So that's that backstory. They're twins and they're not identical, and one is darker than the other, and colorism is a huge underlying issue in their backstory. That said, she didn't just say accept, she said enjoy. And I'm a cognitive psychologist, and one of the things that happens is when we encounter situations, it's kind of like the battered woman syndrome. And we come to be so familiar with what we know that we actually crave it, and we accept that as the normal. And when in fact we don't get it, our body reacts physiologically and chemically with almost a withdrawal pattern. And then when we do get what we have come to be conditioned to receive, there's a almost like an addiction, almost like an addict response in the body that can be likened to enjoyment. That's kind of one of the ways I interpreted what
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that, Mel, in the sense that I remember being in high school, and for the first time, I decided to wear my hair natural in an afro. And so I was just going about my day. And then at some point, I went to the bathroom and I saw that there were all these pens and pencils and twigs and stuff that had been stuck in my hair throughout the day, and I didn't know. And I remember a moment where I was like pissed off and embarrassed. And then I decided to just not remove any of them and go back to the class, act like it was normal. And I think, Mel, it's a little bit like what you're saying. Like I'd kind of become conditioned to being such an alien, such a person that people could just like poke and prod and not just touch my hair, but other things too, right? That I was like, I guess this is normal. I didn't enjoy being inadequate, but I enjoyed the seduction in the sense that it was attention. And who doesn't want attention as a high schooler? And so I kind of put those two things together. Like I'm already alien, strange here, and I guess it's attention. And so that it kind of fits this quote, enjoyment of being inadequate. Let me go to the final two hands raised. I saw Guylaine Hubbard.
Hi, it's Ghislaine, but everybody
thank
says
you.
it wrong at first.
No, we're actually going to talk about name pronunciations next week. It's very important.
Okay.
So thank you for correcting me.
I'm an adoptive mom. I'm a social worker in adoption. My family is multiracial. So my kids actually have the same birth mom. And she is Caucasian, but our daughter's birth father was African American. And I'm biracial and my husband's Caucasian. So our family all fits together, but we're not related, biologically related to our children. So I see what Lupita said more along the lines of a defense mechanism. I mean, I agree with Mel and with what you were just saying, but it's also a defense mechanism because so much time was spent looking at herself in the mirror and expecting something, and then that became sort of normal. So if it was a defense mechanism, it's like, okay, she expects the normal, instead of being let down by seeing that was normal, nothing changed.
Sure. I hear that. I think you're right. I thank you all so much for digging deep and truly thinking about this. It's a great start to next week when all of us will have an opportunity to speak. What was I going to say about this? Last thing to wrap us up on this. It's a beautiful thing that we're all together having discussions, dissecting this. And it's also important for us to remember that out in the world, for Lupita, her actions may have been applauded by society. Ways that I learned to assimilate in whiteness were seen as really positive things. So there's like a sense of almost being gaslit that happened for me as a transracial adoptee, where people would say, you are the whitest Black person I've ever met, and say that as though it's a compliment. And then even going back into the home and having my parents work to cultivate my Blackness as white folks, there was a lot of confusion. And all the while I walked through life with a lot of accolades. Angela, you're doing so great. You're so well spoken. You're so like all of these things that are positive on its face, but for me, underlying them was a lot of internal strife around my racial identity. So this is what we're going to talk about when we move to talk about microaggressions next week. We need to wrap up. So I would like to just end with this most gorgeous photo that I love. Hopefully folks know this story of this boy who asked to feel Obama's his hair. He wondered if his hair was like his. And I just love this picture because the boy's eyes, you know, it's my favorite photo to represent how important it is to see yourself in the world. So I want to end with that, as well as my information. I'll see everybody again next week, of course, but before I hand it over, just so you know where you can find me at Instagram or email me or whatever you want. But yes, I'm so thankful for everyone's presence, and I look forward to getting into it deeper next week. So I'm going to hand it back over to Taylor.
I'm going to take it away here. Taylor is having some difficulties, but I'll take it away. Good to see everybody. Thank you so much for being present in this training. And I can see in the comments, continue to put some love in the comments. Angela Tucker, such a great and phenomenal training today. Give her a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
For Angela. So many great and comments in the chat. We're gonna say the chat just so you can read them.
Appreciate
A lot
it.
of good love in the chat.
Wow.
So we are pleased. We are really pleased to provide a certificate of completion for this session. And so to sign up for your certificate and to share your feedback for today's event, please complete the following form. I'm gonna put the link in the chat. Here you go. And to sign up for reminders of the series, please visit the link below for Angela. So let me put these links in the chat for you so you have this information. This link here is for the form for the certificate for those of you who are interested. And if you want to be informed and stay up to date with our work here, this is the Eventbrite. And here's Angela's website. Please pay a visit to her website. Gander at the website. Reach out to her if you have any questions. I'm sure she's always willing to speak and connect with you. There's her website there. And you can also contact Taylor Dudley if you have any questions about today's training or about the UCLA Pritzker Center for Strengthening Children and Families. That's Taylor's email. So you can copy and paste that and reach out to her. Thank her for all the work that she's done to put this on as well. And then please follow us on Twitter. I'm gonna put our Twitter down below. The more people are following us, the more we can get the word out about these incredible trainings, great resources, and community events that we put on. That's our Twitter there. All right, well, that will be all for us. I'm just gonna put the website, our website, into the chat here. And again, I wanna thank you all for coming out tonight, as if we're having a little shindig. It felt like it though. This was some good information. Felt like a good community party with all the right ingredients. So thank you so much again, Angela, for being here today. And thank you all for being present, being engaged. And we see you at the next training. Here's our website. Have a good one, y'all.